Okay, so our opening speaker is Maureen Medved. Her pronouns are she, her, and she's a writer of screen, fiction, stage, and a reviewer of film and television. Her screen adaptation of her first novel, The Tracy Fragments, starring Elliot Page and directed by Bruce MacDonald, opened the Panorama program at the 57th annual Berlinale, winning the Manfred Salzgeber Prize and numerous other awards. Her work has featured at international festivals, won awards, and has screened at MoMA. She works and lives in Vancouver, and she's at the UBC School of Creative Writing, where she's an associate professor. Yeah, I won't go into the extra bit. It's your old bio. And I'm helping Maureen with the slides today. So
Thank God. All right. So great to be here. Now, okay, this should be interesting. All right. I'm neither a tech whiz nor whatever this is. Okay, but we're here. Am I too loud? Because I've got single-sided hearing loss now. So, it's all, crapshoot at this point. Okay, so I'm also going to give a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to acknowledge that I am giving this talk on the land that is situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. I also have balance issues, so this should be interesting. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's a real honor to be here with all my friends at Immunity Canada. I'd like to preface my talk by saying that these are by no means my only medical issues that I've had, but I've selected some prominent ones to tell my story here today. And I call this talk Maureen's 25 Medical Mysteries. I think there's more than 25 now, but whatever. When she was 5, my daughter realized she will die. She looked at me with stark betrayal, as if I'd slapped her. I told her, it won't happen for a really long time, and by then you will become part of the flowers and the trees. She cried, I don't want to become part of the flowers and the trees. And I could hardly tolerate the cut of her pain. She drew that, actually. Years ago, I'd seen a little black lamb leap across an open field. My daughter was once like that lamb, but the inevitability of death diminished her joy. Maybe when you're older, I told her, they will discover a cure for death. Her face brightened as the power of this lie seeped in. But was it a lie? Science was making progress. Like many of you, I have experienced many near deaths, complicated, varied, and innumerable. By threatening me all my life, these deaths have taught me how to live. I call these threats, these near deaths, my golden circles. Kind of like Fiona's top there. As a young child, I had the usual mumps, infections, bronchitis, earaches. But don't most kids, the doctors said. Then the tonsils came out when I was 3. Then as a young teen, the chickenpox. I was far sicker than the others in my family because I was the oldest, the doctors said. That then led, a few years later, to a strange undiagnosed illness. I couldn't walk for months. The doctors never understood why. It must have been a virus, they said. I can see people laughing in the audience because they all recognize this story. I couldn't imagine anything more serious than a virus at that time in my life. Then I did get a virus. It was called mononucleosis, and I missed many months of school. Then the super enlarged lymph nodes. Cancer was whispered. Biopsies came back, and they were all benign, thank God. But during the pre-internet years, I thought death only came for the old, the stupid, and the unlucky. Death. What was that? I had grown up in the 70s and 80s. Magazine rock stars glittered in our otherwise sterile suburban imaginations. I had applied myself with a Girl Guide's focus to studying tiny knots where individuality could be picked open and unraveled. For years, illnesses manifested and disappeared like the cigarette smoke that curled and lingered around every corner. I didn't think about how sick I kept getting, allowing intense experiences to fill up the spaces between this circle and the next. I wanted to taste every part of the world, to throw myself against the light and burn. Then graduation, college, London. Then Montreal, Berlin, Paris, Greece, Les Foufounes, CBGBs, the Cat Club. Words and warnings surfaced inside me like a magic 8-ball. But I pushed them down. I lived fast and hard, and the future burned far away, off the edges of the horizon. I felt horrible, sick, exhausted, but normal, I thought. Then one day I'd returned home for Christmas. My head sagged into the turkey and gravy, immediately whisked off to the hospital, placed in isolation. Robots attended me. I realize now they were probably hazmat suits. Your hemoglobin is plummeting, they told me. We don't know if you are a risk to us or we are a risk to you. If you'd waited one more day to get here, you'd be dead. I was 26. Dying in a day seemed dramatic. My parents stood at my bed when the doctors popped in. There's a new disease, they said. It's called AIDS. I wondered if it was even possible to contract a disease I'd only read about in newspapers. It was like a science fiction movie. Then I thought, whatever I'd done to get this totally wasn't worth it. I'd grown up in the suburbs, a new house, bay windows. My father sold insurance. I had dated a high school football player. I'd once had a perm. As my parents stared in stunned silence, I knew this wasn't what they had in mind when they'd conceived me. But it turned out not to be AIDS. It turned out to be a disease called autoimmune hemolytic anemia. High doses of prednisone. A splenectomy, oh yes, a splenectomy. Fingers crossed that this works, they told me. Well, what happens if it doesn't work, I asked them. Let's cross that bridge later, they said. I'd hidden from the world after that and threw myself into my writing, something that I didn't really think would amount to anything significant, but miles away from all this sickness and death talk. No traveling to other continents, they warned me, where any mosquitoes will carry illnesses. But we can't save you from those. Oh, goody. The mosquitoes were everywhere I wanted to go. But the medical problems kept mounting. More enlarged lymph nodes, more biopsies. Then dysplasia, severe, moderate to severe cervical dysplasia, more biopsies. Then circles piled around circles. Then there was the pneumonia, the hospital visits, where I had the Empress Suite at St. Paul's Hospital overlooking the city of Vancouver. Then pneumonia again, same diagnosis, same suite. Every cloud, even the pneumatic ones, have a silver lining, the real estate and the views. Then glass in the eye, excruciating pain, which turned out to be shingles, which is connected to the chicken pox. More circles, more golden circles. Then I fell in love. Do you want a baby? My partner had asked. I guess, I said. It didn't matter. As I suspected, I was broken. My body and mind rejected every pregnancy. Nothing in my life had prepared me to hold on to life. Don't worry, the doctors told me. You won't have a baby, you're too old. Then we're at hypothyroidism. After a few years and a number of pregnancy losses, they finally sent me to an endocrinologist. I demanded to go to an endocrinologist who confirmed that I had Hashimoto's and could not have a successful pregnancy until I lowered my TSH levels. Then almost immediately after beginning Synthroid, in my mid-40s, a little girl surfaced within me. Stunned by fear, wonder, and amazement, I wanted to protect that tiny pulsing life. But as my daughter's hand curled around my finger, the circles increased, deepened, and tightened their grip, replacing that of my daughter's. Every day I walked through a thick fog. Exhaustion sheared me to my bones, baffling illnesses, pneumonia again, cellulitis, shingles, infections, strange, rapidly multiplying cells that held knives against my throat. It's normal, the doctors said. You have a young child. You're in your mid-40s. What do you expect? When my daughter was 2, another circle arrived. My husband just became diagnosed with a serious heart defect and needed open heart surgery within the next few months. Immediately, my back seized, like immediately upon hearing this. My head seared with pain. Now, this isn't in my speech, but I'd just come home from the gym, and I remember thinking, I feel better than I felt in years. So my back seized, my head seared with pain. I trembled and shook on the floors. I was speaking in tongues. My daughter clung to me, reaching, sobbing as my husband pulled her away. My daughter and I were once intrinsically linked, but now my illness separated us. When I arrived, I was emaciated. When I arrived at the hospital, I was emaciated and could hardly speak. The doctors convinced I was a drug addict living on the streets. Where do you live? They said to me, and I was pointing. That's all I could do. And they went, I think I said up the street, and they said, she's a lady from the streets with a baby. Someone help her. They told me I was fine, basically to stop doing drugs, and they released me from the hospital. Please, I begged them, don't send me away. The next morning, my husband roused me from bed. The hospital had called. Sepsis. Septic shock, the doctors told me when I arrived at the hospital. You're the sickest person at St. Paul's right now. As I slanted on a gurney, they pumped gallons of water into my body to maintain my blood pressure as they gave me drugs to fight the infection in my blood. The idea that I was dying flashed repeatedly as I stared at the computer monitor that instructed on proper hand washing protocols. Even with my daughter, knowing that I may never see her again, that she would not remember me if I were to die, because she was like 2 at that time. The doctor injected me with morphine, and I floated away. When I woke up, they told me I'd made it, but all my medication had scarred my veins. To feed me antibiotics, they inserted a PICC line from my arm into the vein near my heart. My daughter I was still breastfeeding before I was admitted to the hospital because she was 2, and I thought I'd keep it going till she was 3. Where we, as I said, where we had once been intrinsically linked, the machine they'd attached me to pump the drugs into my veins had turned me into a creature, both human and humanoid. My 2-year-old daughter, in her sweet pea dress, stood in the living room when I'd returned from the hospital and turned to me warily without recognition, because I'd been away for weeks at that point. Then guess what? I got sepsis again. I think it was about 3 weeks after I got home from the hospital with a whole different infection. Sepsis shocked once more, but this time I knew what it was. Though to be fair, not quite as bad because I had caught it earlier. I'd become a bit, excuse my arrogance, of a master detective at this point. Before I'd left the hospital the second time, I'd been given a radioactive blood tracer to find the bacteria, the same bacteria that had lodged itself inside me and waited like a monster to kill me. They couldn't find the bacteria, but they had a warning. You can no longer breastfeed, they told me. It's time to quit anyway, don't you think? My daughter was 2. I hadn't planned to quit until we were ready, I said, quoting the La Leche brochures. And I was doing that via a slow weaning process. But although I had searched for a loophole, I knew that the connection between me and my daughter was now finally severed. I lay on the floor next to what would soon be my daughter's new bedroom and her new double bed. I wept as the hot milk drained out of me and dried away that tiny, fragile bond between us forever. I was still on the PICC line, and my husband repeatedly had to postpone his heart surgery so one of us could care for our 2-year-old. The city then sent a social worker who met with my husband and I to get our affairs in order, re our daughter. You don't want to put her in public care, believe me, the social worker said. Eventually, I had recovered and my husband got his heart surgery. And even though I had weaned off the antibiotics after 2 bouts of sepsis, my brain still felt as though it was clotted with damp newspaper. I was back at work and wandered the halls of the university like a ghost. Nobody seemed to look in my direction. Maybe I was already dead, I thought. I went in and out of emergency throughout the next handful of years. But after another bad infection, my infectious disease doctor sent me to an immunologist. The immunologist did his tests. You don't have a spleen, he said. The scar with its decorative perforations left by the surgical staples reminded me every day of his assessment and that it was correct. Here, the immunologist warned me on the hazards of a splenectomy, making me incapable of fighting certain bacterial infections, especially those that affect the lung. But he also told me some more news. I had a condition called MGUS. Yay, another disease, another circle, another golden circle. I had never heard of half of these diseases, so why was I getting them? But now I was lucky enough to know all about MGUS. I knew that MGUS lowered and permanently impacted my antibodies, making it so that the protein produced by the MGUS altered the readability of those antibodies. I would thus never know if my antibodies were increasing, nor would I ever effectively respond to vaccines, so far as anyone could determine. These left me absolutely vulnerable, in some cases untreatable, and not fully diagnosable, like no traveling to many countries where even subcutaneous infusions of plasma will not save me, nor will the vaccines. The immunologist sent me to a hematologist. The MGUS is a precursor to multiple myeloma. We will need to test you for this every 6 months for the rest of your life in case you develop this bone cancer or its smoldering precursor. Then all the UTIs, which might seem minor unless you get them every month, and they go into your kidneys and cause a kidney infection. The UTIs, infections that wouldn't quit, antibiotics, no swimming ever again, they told me, in water that is not filled with salt. No lakes, no pools, no hot tubs, then soon, no baths at all. I could shower, but that's about it. Another circle, another golden circle. Then my traumatic brain injury. Why and how is that related? So weakened was I by all of this other stuff that when the bus ran the red light, I was getting up to grab the pole, I fell back and saw stars hitting my head in the back of the bus. The next few years I spent in dark rooms, away from light and sound. Caution. If this ever happens to you, do not go on a child's fair ride, even a year post-concussion. Then came the CVID diagnosis, what we're all here for. The Boy in the Plastic Bubble was a movie in the 1970s starring John Travolta, based on the life of David Vedder and Ted DeVita, who had SCID. I had a milder subset called primary immunodeficiency. I don't live in a bubble like the people with SCID, who are usually diagnosed, I think immediately, I'm just improving now, but I think immediately upon birth, and they have to be in full-on isolation, and there's extensive treatments involved that I know nothing about, so I'm not going to speak to that. But my condition was a mystery then. But now we know probably much of what you've had is connected to the condition you have now, the doctors told me. It was a constellation of symptoms. The GP, the endocrinologist, the infectious disease, the hematologist, the immunologist, the internal medicine people, and all the other doctors. There were so many. Science's tempo was a frenzied primordial dance whose strange offerings seemed to spark off at random. Maybe a cure for death was around the corner, and then guess what? I mean, it's a minor thing, right? Because of all the prednisone I'd taken for the hemolytic anemia, they could tell somehow by the type of cataract I had that that's what caused early cataracts. Well, what's the big deal? I thought I'd probably need the surgery eventually, so let's just get it over with. I got the early bird special. Then, as if this wasn't enough, when is it ever enough? The pandemic hit. There's no slide for that, because we all know what it is. I won't leave the house until it's over, I told everyone I knew. But due to my condition, my daughter and my husband also could no longer leave the house. But it wasn't really a house, was it? This is Vancouver, where every square foot is at a premium, and we just bought our first tiny condo to finally get a toe in the market. But the apartment was about 940 square feet, and we three lived in 2.5 rooms. I remember saying to my husband when we were thinking of buying this place that we couldn't really afford, I'll work in cafes when I wasn't at UBC. I mean, I'd write in the cafes, right? I convinced him then to buy the place because I wouldn't be home all the time. And we could handle the three of us plus the 2 animals being in there. But now here we were, prisoners of our own real estate, isolated from even our neighbors. Now, we only exited our apartment when the lights, or we were only excited in our apartment, sorry, when the lights of a car grew and shrank past our windows. That's so sad. I feel like a tiger in a cage, my daughter lamented, staring through the bars of our balcony. At the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't even go outside in the halls of our building, as doing so meant we'd need to go through those shared halls, and my building would not commit to mask wearing. And you have to remember, folks, this was before vaccines. Like, we didn't know, don't have a spleen. They told me anything could, I had immunoglobulins at that point. I had penicillin that I had to take twice a day because I had a splenectomy. I remember thinking twice a day for the rest of my life, I'm going to be on penicillin. That's not good for you. And then I went and searched the net, and guess what? You want to take that penicillin because the stories of what's going on out there for people who didn't take the penicillin, this is without a splenectomy and with this other stuff I have, not good. Better to take the penicillin. But anyway, my building wouldn't support mask wearing. You're the only one who is asking for masks, they said. I have a medical condition. Does my life mean nothing to you? I lamented over Zoom, but my neighbors all stared back at me wearily. It's not fair to your daughter, a doctor friend told me. But what's worse, I thought, losing a mother? A major trigger for childhood depression and lifelong depression? Or do I keep the kid locked up so that my 12-year-old, that's the age she was at this point, loses 2 years of social development and school? Because at that point, my kid was in public school, and in Vancouver, there was no online support. There wasn't a lot of online support, okay? Like, I knew people at private schools who were getting a lot of support, but they didn't have the funding, I guess. So my 12-year-old loses 2 years of social development, and we didn't know how long this would last. This could have gone on forever as far as we knew. But every month we were hoping it'll be over soon, but 2 years went by. And the impact on my kid was not good. I'm going to tell you right now, and for her own sake, I'm not going to get into that, but here, Immunity Canada made all the difference for our family. Those annual meetings, they weren't annual, monthly meetings during the bleakest of times. I meant they were national meetings and they were monthly meetings during the bleakest of times when I had no interaction with anyone else in the world except on Zoom, when I'd lost friends, literally lost friends permanently, and couldn't go into work at all or even see family except my immediate, like my husband and my kid. That was it. I didn't see grandparents, nobody. When I did talk to people on those Zooms, they often didn't grasp the terror of someone who believed they could possibly die if they stepped outside of those 2.5 rooms. Remember, again, this is before we had the vaccines, Paxlovid, and Evusheld. We'd heard stories on the news of gross numbers of people dropping dead in the corridors of hospitals. Young, healthy people. What would happen to us, to our families? And now my mother, in a different city, she lives in Winnipeg, had a serious medical crisis. I talked to her through months of evaluation and treatment only by the thread of my landline. And her landline, actually. But so we didn't even Zoom. I couldn't even see my mother. And she had no help. She was on her own. We discussed how to keep ourselves and our family safe. And I want to note that my brother did eventually have to get transferred in his job and go help her because I couldn't do it. And his job kept saying, why can't your sister do it? Well, my brother was lucky enough to be in a job where they were able to transfer him to another province, and he doesn't have a family, so he was the person who had to go. And he moved his entire life out there to help my mom, our mom. We didn't know how to keep our family safe. How could we get access to vaccinations and drugs? How could we keep our jobs, many of us asked, and make them understand our plight? I was lucky enough working at UBC, they were super supportive, are super supportive. But there are a lot of people who didn't have that support and did lose jobs or were terrified of losing jobs. And we asked the single question that seemed too horrible to even fully grasp: what if this pandemic never ends? Especially as weeks turned into months and then several years. Eventually, we'd learn to evaluate our chances, and we'd learn to take well-considered risks, but not without the support and encouragement of our Immunity Canada friends, solidifying friendships that would really last a lifetime. Then after all this and the treatments and protocols, I picked up the phone. Nothing. I moved the receiver from my left ear to my right. I could hear my friend talking into the phone as clear as day. And out of the depths of the tiny hole of my apartment, I crawled, terrified, by the way, to a hearing specialist's. You have a brain tumor. It's the only cause of this kind of hearing loss. But surely not the only cause, I asked them. Yes, they said, the only cause. Now I have single-sided hearing loss. Another circle, another golden circle. Then later that same year, I noticed I had 2 ankles on my left leg. I've never noticed this before, I thought, examining the 2 bony protrusions. I had a leg tumor. Another circle, another golden circle, another tumor. It was a pretty large one. Prepare for cancer this time, the surgeon said. But luckily it wasn't cancer. It was a benign tumor that had to be removed, the same one that I had in my head. They removed the leg tumor. Then the head tumor grew so fast and so hard, this is the same year, that I went from single-sided deafness into neurosurgery. Never been more terrified in my life, except for the 2 bouts of sepsis. I could no longer walk without falling over. I couldn't see out of the left eye. As I no longer produce tears on that side, it's still a real problem. And it hurts to keep that eye open. I was slumped over when I walked. I couldn't see, I couldn't hear, my face became numb, and food no longer had any flavor. And my face actually began to torque. Then another circle. I don't want neurosurgery, I said to the doctors. I'm scared to have permanent facial paralysis. It didn't matter that I was almost 60 at this point, that I had been with my partner for more than 20 years, that nobody saw me because I rarely ever left the house, except for doctor's appointments. My face was definitely not my moneymaker anyway. Well, we can't control what happens to your face, as the tumor is adjacent to the facial nerve. But we can try. We want to see if we need the hearing nerve. Okay, I told them, permanently, if you have to choose, kill that hearing, but save the face. My friends thought I was nuts. We'll try to save the face, they said, but the hearing is already gone. The 3 of us, me, my daughter, my husband, still live together. But we are wary, apprehensive, and walk around highly alert as we take each step and wonder if it will, in fact, be our last. The brain surgery worked, but the risk of the tumor returning is about 10%. I was warned I might not be so lucky the next time, although I did just have an MRI and it was still there. I still have a brain tumor because they left a bit so I wouldn't have full facial paralysis, but it hasn't grown yet. Today, though, I do wait for the next circle, the next golden circle, the one that will finally take me when I can no longer fight. Just as the oryx calf is lifted to be licked, evaluated, and devoured by the lion. But I am not yet the oryx. I want to be that little black lamb racing through an open field. And my daughter still sometimes asks if she's going to die. if I'm going to die. And each time she asks, the spaces between grow longer and longer, and I know soon she won't need to ask anymore. But the key is, I was still alive. We were all alive. I had to accept my limitations and make a choice. Was I going to feel badly about all this or embrace life? I reached deep inside myself, and within the tiny little scope of my life, I did find joy. I think there's a drawing of circles my daughter did. I asked her, I said, please draw what you think that was like. And my husband actually said, I hope this doesn't depress her too much. As each circle continues to embrace me, I need the superficialities of the physical world less. By reducing the world, I have found meaning in the tiniest details. The circles live inside me. We are part of the same organic fabric, the same fabric that made my daughter, the flowers and the trees. The fog that has descended on me all my life has finally lifted. It really has. And today I am a writer, a novelist, a screenwriter on faculty at UBC, currently developing research that centers the disability experience as a force of truth and creativity. I have discovered that my experiences have given me an unusual perspective on living that has made me a more interesting person and a writer. And I don't think I would be those things otherwise. This sounds like a cliche, but it may be true in my case. Would I be other than I am if I could? And the answer now would probably be no, I would not. It sounds like a cliche, but it's true because the myriad of conditions over the years has literally alchemized me into exactly who I always wanted to be, who I wanted to be as a child, and it seemed impossible. And now it's happening, but I think it's only because that illness allowed me to stand still enough and to become strong and more internally driven than, I was more interested in the outside world and having a good time. And now my good time is different. The pandemic may be over for now, for today, but I don't believe it won't return in some other form. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in a year or 10 years. I urge you all to continue taking care of yourselves, to be your own best advocate. We have learned our lessons. We need someone to galvanize and speak on our behalf, as we now know that in our highly politicized world with increasingly economic disparity and stresses on the medical system, that we do matter, that we are not disposable, and we each make an invaluable contribution to our communities. But that numbers talk. And therefore, I encourage all of you, both here and online, to continue your involvement and support of Immunity Canada, our patient organization, who is our home and our greatest support and advocate and disseminator of knowledge for the needs of our very special group. I would like to say thank you to Fiona, David, and Elizabeth, Jan, and Whitney, and all the folks at Immunity Canada whose support, advocacy, and information meant so much during all these times. And those meetings, I finally felt validated at those Immunity Canada meetings, no longer crazy and self-doubting, but very much sane through the darkest times, and now finally back into the golden circles and the light. And I also want to thank Ellie Kraje Gardner, editor of Against Death, the anthology that some of this talk was taken from and adapted from. That's an essay I wrote for that anthology, and Brian Kaufman from Anvil Press, who published it. Thank you very much.